what it correlates to is three things. It correlates to what position you have, how big the airplane is, and where you are. That it doesn't correlate to anything else. Doesn't correlate to how many hours you fly. Doesn't correlate to how many nights you're away. Doesn't correlate to how many international trips you have. Although people who fly internationally are typically paid a little more. So you can probably make the case that using it as a framework, as you said, Max. But that's where the correlations lie, and they don't lie anywhere else. As a data person, I want to find that stuff for folks. I want to tell you, yeah, if you're away more, you make more money. But that's just not the case. The data doesn't support it.
This is the 21.5 Show.
You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
Whether you're a professional pilot or want to be one, you're in the right place.
Let's get started.
Join professional aviators Dylan and Max as they talk their experience in the airlines, business aviation, and more.
Life is good.
Industry experts, unique stories, and plenty of fun. This is the 21.5 Show.
Here we go.
All right, Max, we are so excited to welcome back one of our favorite guests, Dr. Chris Broyhill. Of course, folks will remember that he is the founder of the AirComp Calculator, a pilot's favorite tool.
To talk about one of their favorite things.
That's
which
right.
is money.
It's actually funny, Dr. Broyhill. I meant to tell you this. I met a pilot on the road the other day, and he goes, "Oh, you're the guy that does the podcast." And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Guess what my first episode that I listened to was?" And I was like, I don't know. I was trying to think, and he goes, "Oh, the one's about money, of course." Like, that's the first one he goes to. Anything about salary it seems like it's our most popular. So we know this topic certainly resonates with our listeners, and we check in with you about every quarter to kind of get the latest updates on pilot compensation. So we're excited to find out. It's been a very turbulent 2025 so far. So we're kind of curious to hear what it looks like from your perspective. So welcome to the program, and give us the first update.
Sure. So the bottom line is business is booming, and people are coming to me on an unprecedented level. So one of the things that we are trying to use the calculator more and more for. Now, obviously, when I originally built the calculator, I was thinking more of I'd done so many compensation studies, and I still do them for flight departments, but I thought it was going to be more of an aviation manager's tool. And then as I got into it more and more, I figured, hey, you know what? The individual professionals out there would find this useful also, because if they're the ones that are negotiating for jobs, and they're the ones that need to get a sense of their own worth in the market. So we opened it up, obviously, to anyone and everyone that wants to use it. And the response from the individual level, it continues to grow. More and more individuals, we've automated the site now. So if somebody wants to come in and run a report, used to be you have to go through us, and we'd have to set up an account, and then you could run your report, or we'd have to run it for you. Now people can log on and do it totally by themselves. They can build an account, they can run a report, and if they want to buy more reports, they can without any interaction on our side whatsoever. So that has shown us some remarkable things. And I guess the thing to highlight is that the demand has been high. People love the transparency of seeing what their compensation level should be, and they're taking advantage of it to an increasingly greater degree. And that's been good for us, but it's also good for them. And they've been able to test job offers against. In fact, I spent considerable amount of time on the phone yesterday. So the guy that bought the concierge service that I offer, and he was trying to look at a job offer. He was in a job, but somebody made him a different job offer, and he wanted to evaluate what that compensation was like. And he wanted my opinion about it, in terms of, was this a good offer that they're making? And the conclusion was, yeah, it was actually a good offer that they were making. So he thanked me, and what he does with that, who knows, but it's that kind of thing that we're trying to gear our service as much to the individual professional, be they a pilot, mechanic, scheduler, aviation manager, at whatever level, that sort of thing, so that we can help folks get to where they need to be compensation wise. And we're happy to be in a position where we can provide people that transparency and that availability of data.
What I was going to say is, I think that's smart to address that, because like in the situation Max and I are in, where it's a small Part 91 flight department, there isn't a ton of infrastructure there. We maybe don't have compensation, like a full HR department behind us or anything. And so there's a lot less structure, and so these salaries sort of have to. There needs to be some data there. It's not like a big Fortune 100 department where you sort of have pay bands and ranges and that kind of stuff. And so it's a lot more esoteric on both sides, for the pilot and for the principal. And so I'm not surprised to hear that the kind of the individual plans are gaining success, because I think a lot of people need some sort of baseline or something to help them out.
Yeah, and you using the report too when you sit down literally across from the guy that writes the check and you put it out there. It's not like, well, you just stick your finger on it and say, I'm this guy, so this is what I should be paid. It's a framework for the conversation to say, okay, well, because not all pilot jobs are the same. I don't want people to think they get this report and then they just point to it and say, this is what I should be paid right here, because there's a lot more subjectivity to it as far as how much you're flying and things like that. And so you use that as a framework to then negotiate what to pay, but it really gives you a good baseline of where to start the conversation at, and because otherwise you're just a lot of times I think the principle is that you're just grabbing stuff out of thin air, or what you found on Google, and this gives you a lot more it's a lot more robust thing to base your discussion off of.
Well, I think the way you framed it is perfect. It's a framework for the conversation. It's not, that's what I tell people. It's not the gospel, but what it is indifferent third-party data. I've got no dog in the fight for anybody. I'm a data geek, and I get into the data and I generate the data, and how you use the data is up to you. And to your point, I get into discussion oftentimes about, people will be flying something like a G500, which is the same type rating as a G600. And they're saying, well, if we've got the same type rating, we should be paid the same money. And I'm like, but is it the same job? I mean, if you're flying a G500, odds are you might do some international, but it's probably not mostly international. Whereas the G600 is probably a lot of international, because that's why they buy the airplane. So it's got the legs to do what they want to do. And following on G700, G800. And I know those are going to be different type ratings, or they'll be the same, but differences. A friend of mine flies those airplanes, and I can't ever keep them straight. But the point being, the data does not correlate to, everybody thinks it should correlate to, people will come to me and say, well, we fly X amount of 100 hours a year. We're away this many, this many nights a month. We spend this, they have these many international trips. And I'm like, that's great. The problem is the data doesn't correlate to any of that. What it correlates to is three things. It correlates to what position you have, how big the airplane is, and where you are. It doesn't correlate to anything else. Doesn't correlate to how many hours you fly. Doesn't correlate to how many nights you're away. Doesn't correlate to how many international trips you have. Although people who fly internationally are typically paid a little more, but that's really it. I mean, and so you can try to build a case for all of that stuff. And when you sit down with your principal and it's just your principal and the data, you can probably say that here's the whatever percentile that you want to target, the 50th, the 75th, or wherever. We should be probably paid at the higher end of this because we're checked out 2 different airplanes. We spent a lot of time on the road, and we were away a lot. So you can probably make the case that using it as a framework, as you said, Max, but that's where the correlations lie, and they don't lie anywhere else. As a data person, I want to find that stuff for folks. I want to tell you, yeah, if you're away more, you make more money, but that's just not the case. The data doesn't support it.
Yeah. All right. So 2025 so far has been a turbulent year, both in like the stock market, a lot of changes in business aviation. I'll be honest with you, Dr. Broyhill, a lot of posts that I've been seeing online are, my flight department just closed, I'm looking for a new job. It kind of almost, I don't know if it's, obviously the airlines aren't really hiring right now, so maybe we're seeing a contraction. You track the salary numbers, or all the data every quarter. What are you seeing on your end? Are we plateauing, or are things still moving up? What have been your observations so far?
Well, so it's kind of more anecdotal than data driven. So the data itself only changes once a year. So it changes. The new surveys are currently collecting data. The 2025 surveys are collecting data. I'm working off of 2024 data, which I age through each quarter to make sure it's current, which is what everybody else is doing, by the way. But we're not going to know the impact of all of that till the 2025 data drops. So having said that, however, what I know is what I see anecdotally. And yeah, I've seen a lot of the same the same stuff on LinkedIn, Dylan. But I've also seen, I follow job feeds on LinkedIn all the time just to kind of keep my finger on the pulse of the market. There isn't a day that goes by where I don't open LinkedIn and see like 5 different job feeds for pilots or mechanics or flight attendants or something somewhere in the industry. So while these departments are closing, some of them may be closing, others are opening and they're generating jobs. And I get a fair amount of business from people who are looking at new jobs, like the gentleman I mentioned earlier, where, they're being offered, they're looking at different positions, they're being offered a different job, and they're trying to avail themselves of the best out of to take it. In addition, I have a little bit of an unfair advantage. My wife is an aviation transactions attorney, and she's busier than she knows what to do with. I mean, people are buying and selling airplanes left and right. So I don't think there's a survey. I can't remember the data source at the moment. I quote it in the work that I do, but they're expecting 12,000 different airframes to be delivered business aviation wise over the next decade. So between turboprops and turbojets, 12,000 different airframes. Every one of those is going to need somebody to fly it, probably somebody to turn wrenches on it also. So I think we're in a continually expansive phase. I also think, I feel like, I don't know which play this comes from, which Shakespearean play, but the rumors of my demise have been greatly exaggerated is the line. I can't remember who says it. And I think all the people out there who want to think that we can start easing off compensation now are said, pilot shortage is over. We're ebbing up, we're flowing, or blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, tisk, tisk. If that's the way you think, you're not thinking strategically. None of the original conditions of the problem have been changed. We are still not generating pilots in the numbers we need to. The channels through which pilots become pilots who can be useful has not opened up the floodgates. There's still not more of them. We're still retiring old guys like me. I mean, I turned 65 last year. So all the old guys like me are getting retired out of the airline. The baby boomer was the biggest generation thus far. So there's going to be thousands of retirements to contend with. And the airlines are still going to be pulling people in that direction. So yes, are they, some of them on a hiring pause right now and just training people in the pipeline? Yes, but those floodgates are going to open again. I like to say that, the hiring storm we saw, COVID time was like the first part of the hurricane that hits the coast. And right now we're kind of in the eye of that storm, and we're starting to come out of the eye and get back into the wind again. And those people who are thinking they can just kind of cross their arms and pause and take a breath are really not paying attention, and they're definitely not thinking strategically.
That's well said.
And oh, by the way, from 2024 to 2025, business aviation compensation rose about 10%, 9.7%, and the private industry compensation rose 4.1%. So business aviation compensation is growing at over twice the rate of that for normal industry. And what causes that? What causes that is demand for personnel. It's a supply and demand issue. And if people are paying more, it's because there's more demand. If there's more demand, there's more cockpits to fill and more maintenance positions to fill and more scheduling positions to fill, et cetera. So the demand is there. It's kind of channeled differently. I follow a lot of the same posts you do on LinkedIn. I remember reading a post from somebody complaining about the fact that they couldn't get a job, and that they're in business aviation, they're looking for a job and nobody's hiring them. And what I will tell you is, like, there's plenty of jobs out there for the right people that are looking. And I do think for the people that kind of go from job to job and aren't showing loyalty to an employer or are just looking for the next best thing, after a while, word kind of gets around about you. And business aviation, as large as it is also a small community, as you guys well know. And when somebody gets a reputation for being a job hopper or an opportunist or something like that, that word gets out. I think that's what some people who are particularly vociferous, if you will, on LinkedIn are often referring to, and they're not looking in the mirror enough.
Yeah, it's interesting. The people that hop jobs, a lot of times I see it, that are the ones that are sometimes the worst advocate for themselves, because they think just taking this next job is going to fix whatever problem they're trying to fix, whether that's money or schedule or whatever. And they don't go in there and advocate for themselves to create the environment that makes them happy. So they just keep moving from job to job instead of, utilizing some tools, like your survey and really advocating to wait for and then negotiate a job that fits what you're looking for. You know what I mean?
Right.
Instead of just hopping around, waiting, hoping to get
Yeah.
lucky, keep pulling on the slot machine until the sevens
Yeah.
show up. It just, so I think those two things kind of go hand in hand a lot of times from what I've seen, like you said, anecdotally, just being in the business for a while.
Well, it's a lot about the devil, I mean, and I don't say that necessarily in a bad sense. So there's a company I did some work for, their casino outfit located in Las Vegas, and because they're a casino, their guys sit alert. They're on call because they're going to go get the next high roll or whatever. But the schedule they've got is one where what your life is going to look like a year in advance. And the amount of days they get off where they're not on call per month is greater than the average of most people in any of the surveys that I look at. So the guy is saying, do I have to pay top dollar, i.e., do I have to pay well into the 75th percentile, or can I pay above market, may pay in the 60th percentile, but also make the assertion that you got a good quality of life? And I said, yeah. I said, that's monetizable. It's monetizable because it's a predictable environment. And one of the few things we have in business aviation is a predictable environment. And you can monetize a good schedule. And to take that a step further, if you're working for a company where you like going to work every day and you like the people you fly with and you like the people you fly for, and your schedule is, relatively benign, or at least not, crazy, and you're looking to make 15 or 20 grand, or 15 or 20 grand more, then I really don't know kind of what your goals in life are, because a lot of job satisfaction is about a number of different things. First of all, we're lucky because we get to fly these fantastic airplanes, and every day, you're at altitude, watching the world go by from flight level 410. If you're not looking down there and saying, good Lord, I'm so lucky to be able to do this. But that can but hey, this person I'm flying next to, I really enjoy being on the road with them. I really enjoy spending time with them. And the people I work for seem to take good care of me, seem to care about me, and that sort of thing. If you've got an environment like that and you're willing to trade all of that for 15 or 20 grand more a year, I don't know what to tell you, because that's really not what life's about. And here, I'm the money guy telling you that. So, I mean, yeah, as the money guy, I'm telling you that. So it's just,
Yeah.
money isn't everything.
Yeah, it's one piece. And I think that gets back to Max's point, like I have found in this career, you can always make just a little bit more money somewhere else. There'll always be a job where you can make, a couple more percent. And there's definitely a law of diminishing returns there when that happens. So, okay, had a question for you regarding these surveys. You especially now you mentioned that you got a lot more individuals using it. Maybe it's not a director of a Fortune 500 company who maybe is a little bit more trained in communicating with compensation professionals and in negotiations. You kind of have the everyman using this report. And I feel like I've heard stories of people using these reports with success, but I've also heard of a lot of people failing with these reports because they print it out, they slap it down, and they say, here we go. So can you maybe give some advice to folks who are using salary data in a negotiation? What are maybe one or two things that you find folks are successful using this, and then maybe a couple ways that people can actually shoot themselves in the foot with the data that they need to avoid?
Well, there's two levels to consider this conversation with. Number one is, let's say you are an aviation director, and let's say you do know that your flight department is undercompensated. Your HR compensation professionals, and now that I've gotten my certified comp professional thing, I've got a lot more respect for what those folks do. They are on your team. Now, yes, they are biased toward the company, but they are on your team. So the ones who have been successful from a corporate perspective are the ones that engage the aviation comp professionals as part of the equation and don't distance them. It used to be aviation directors would hire me just with no reference to the compensation professionals, and then I'd do a study for them, or I'd do a series of reports, and then they turn to the comp folks and ram them down their throat. That's probably not the best approach anymore. Now, if there's a principal or an executive in the middle of the equation, that can be different. But most of the time, that's not the best way to do it. The best way is to get the comp professionals involved. And increasingly, comp professionals are the ones that are hiring me directly, or the aviation director is going to the comp professionals and saying, you should talk to this guy. He can provide you a new tool for your tool kit in which you might be able to find better levels of compensation for us. And by keeping that team environment and removing the confrontational aspect, it tends to be a lot more successful. Now, where individuals are concerned, I think it's always about respect. If you use the data with great power comes great responsibility. You know, with good data comes responsibility also. And I think if you're going to use it as a confrontational tool, you know, you're already off base. So if you go into a compensation discussion and they're offering you X and you've printed out one of my reports and it graphs X against the data and X is low versus the data, I think you show that to them and say respectfully, you know, I found this data source very well respected in the industry, and this is what that comes out like. What do you think we should do about that, or what can we do about it? And rather than being confrontational, you behave more collaboratively and in a manner that engenders cooperation as opposed to confrontation. And I think that's where it comes better. But if you go in there with your arms crossed and say, this guy says I should be paid this and you're not paying me this, what are we going to do about that? That's not really going to help you, because a lot of the folks say in a smaller department, like you mentioned, Dylan, you're dealing with the executive themselves. You might be dealing with the aviation director. Maybe you're a pilot in the aviation director's organization. Putting them on the spot is never going to go well for you, because folks that rise to those positions are used to, dealing with, adversaries, and they'll go into adversarial mode, and you don't want them to go into adversarial mode. You want them to go into leadership mode. You want them to go into doing the right thing mode and engendering that with the data. Independent third party, this is the way that data maps out. Was just curious about what you think about it, or something like that. Something that's non-threatening in its approach. And I encourage people, if they buy my service or whatever, oftentimes they need me to have conversations with the people that they work with. And I do that. I mean, there may be a charge for that. There may not be, depending on what level of service they buy, but I'm always happy to have a conversation with somebody about where the data comes from, how it's derived. And about 99 and 94, 100% of the time, those conversations go very favorably.
Let's take a quick break to tell you about a friend of the show, Timothy P. Pope. Tim is a certified financial planner who specializes in helping professional pilots chart a smarter financial course. Whether you're focused on retirement, investment management, or strategic tax planning, Tim brings the tools and insight to help you make the most of your career and beyond. He's also the host of the Pilot's Portfolio podcast, where he breaks down real-world financial strategies designed specifically for pilots. Timothy P. Pope, helping professional pilots make the most out of life.
What I think it kind of correlates is when you're dealing with a principal is it kind of goes with the same theme when you're dealing with them with a lot of different things. So if you can't go to said destination because where he wants to go because the runway is too short, right? And you say, here, unfortunately, we can't do that because of the performance that you're playing. But here's where we can go that's closer. Which one works good? You talk about it, or and I think the compensation stuff is kind of the same thing. Like your job as the aviation professional is to gather the data and render an opinion, based on that data from you as a professional. And it's the same thing. You say, hey, I've sourced, this is the best data I can provide you, guidance for this discussion, and let's talk about it. And that's instead of, saying, oh, well, we want to go here. Sorry, we can't do that. That's kind of like slapping the thing down and saying, here's what the numbers are. It's you have to be a lot more. It's a lot more dynamic of a discussion, and I've seen people that do that, and they're just like, no, we can't go there. Well, it's like, dude,
End of conversation.
End of conversation. You're like, you gotta. Your job is to find solutions. To the problem that is to be solved here, and it's the same thing. Like you have to be use the data and to drive the discussion to solve the problem, and it's the same operating the airplane and is negotiating compensation, or, scheduling maintenance too. It's like, oh, well, yeah, we can't do that trip because it's going to take too long to do the maintenance here. Well, what if we took it to the service center that runs 3 shifts and we could do it in half the time, but it might cost more? What do you want to do? Is it worth it to pay more and get it done quicker, or to do it at home here and it's going to take longer, but it'll cost less? Like, so I think you just have to approach it the same way a good aviation manager or lead pilot or whatever approaches all of these different problems you encounter in business aviation. It's not a one and done sort of thing. It's a lot more dynamic than that.
Max, this is all part of Max's book called Finessing the Owner, which will be on bookshelves next year. It does take a little bit of skill, but let's shift gears for a minute and talk about that. Last time you were on the show, Dr. Broyhill, we talked about leadership a lot. We talked about the lack of leadership in business aviation. We talked about the lack of resources for leadership in business aviation. You're trying to tackle some of that. Give us an update on some leadership aspects that you see and how you're trying to bring some resources to the community.
Sure. There are those out there who think of me as just a comp geek. I've had a substantial time in leadership of my career. I was in the Air Force for 20 years and then held a variety of leadership positions there. And then in business aviation, held a variety of leadership positions there as well, up to chief pilot and director of aviation for 2 Fortune 100 flight departments. So I've seen my fair share of what that looks like from both sides of the transaction. So I've always been a student of leadership. And there's 2 aspects of it. One of the things that kind of gets my pet peeve is I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn because it's essential to my business. I will tell you that I hate social media by and large. But LinkedIn has been integral to the success of my company, the success of my brand, and just interacting with fellow professionals. And I am a military guy, as I mentioned. But one of the things that I see a lot of is military people making their way into the civilian world and automatically thinking because they were in the military, they know everything there is to know about leadership. And I have to, I don't want to say it's a mini rant, but maybe it is. I just think, I got out of the Air Force and, when I retired, thought I knew everything there was to know about leadership. Heck, I'd been in a fighter squadron, led a fighter squadron, was a mission commander. I knew everything there was. And you get in the civilian world and you realize that this is a different pool and you're dealing with different people with different motivations. And you need to kind of think about that a little bit before you start offering leadership advice. So in the military, by and large, you do things because you have to. And if you don't do things because you have to, you can be prosecuted for not doing that thing you have to. Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, you don't obey a lawful order, you can be court-martialed. So and the other thing is that, if you're in a combat role like I was, those you're ordering people into a situation which could maybe cost them their lives. So the military system is based on have to. Now, it's great if you can make them want to. And I've worked with a few people during my military career who made you want to. I mean, people that they would say, go here, die now, and I would do it because they were that good. But the system is based on have to, not want to. So in the business aviation world, the civilian world, it's all based on want to. Because if you don't convince somebody to want to, they could just say, hey, I'm not doing this, and they're out of there. They'll just walk out the door or not refuse a task or what have you. But the want to is the essence of it. And discerning the difference between those two and learning the nuances of that and coming out of the military from the have to environment and think you understand everything about the want to environment, you're like on drugs. And I read that repeatedly and it just makes me scratch my head. So, and there are people that have developed whole lines of like business practices and motivational tours thinking they know everything about leadership from the have to and telling people who live in the want to world about how they should lead people. And I don't think that's applicable. I just think you have to be very careful. So I know there's probably people out there who are watching this who could be coming from the military world to the civilian world. And my advice to people making that transition is do the thing you did when you changed units in the military. For about the first 3 months, eyes open, mouth shut. Just watch and pay attention to the culture of what's going on around you. and listen and heed what you're seeing before you become so eager to offer your opinions about things. In any organization, I would say that's good advice to anybody, even being hired in business aviation, going from one business aviation organization to the next. So I remember at Exelon, we hired this one person who felt like they had the right to walk into our organization and tell us what was messed up, and they hadn't been there for any length of time and didn't know the dynamics of the culture of the organization. Eyes open, mouth shut. Great words for the first 3 months in a new organization. Eyes open, mouth shut. Just look, listen, and pay attention. But for folks trying to make the military to civilian transition, it's a lot more complicated than you think it is. And you need to pay it with respect. And the want to thing, one of my heroes in the Air Force was a guy by the name of Robin Olds. He was retired as a brigadier general. Robin Olds led the Wolfpack, the 8th Fighter Wing, in they're stationed in Thailand. So I was a member of the 8th Fighter Wing when it was in Korea. The Wolfpack is what we called it. And he led Operation Bolo, which was where they pretended to be F-105 fighter bombers, and we used the same call signs, the same formations to lure the MiGs up to come get them, but they were all F-4s, and they killed a lot of MiGs that day, and it's like a legendary operation. But he is like, you read his biography, and I'm connected with his daughter, Christina Olds, on LinkedIn, and I've bought several signed copies of his biography from her. But if you want to read how a military leader can make people want to, he's a good study in that. He made people want to follow him. And that's really a good thing for anybody in a leadership role to learn how to do, make people want to follow you. But see, the other part of your question, Dylan, Mr. Mike Nichols and I have been working on a pretty definitive leadership textbook for about the last 2 years. It is nearing its final phases. We hope to have it published in the fall and available if you happen to be going to base, or it'll be available at Barnes & Noble. But it is a compilation of the work by some 30-some different leaders in business aviation who have written chapters in which they have expertise, everything from buying and selling airplanes to day-to-day operations to how to structure the flight operation from a legal perspective to depreciation. What does that look like? Safety management systems, you name the topic. We've got something about. Of course, I wrote a chapter on leadership, but I also wrote a topic on compensation. It's pretty comprehensive. So it's going to give the aviation leader, somebody in that position, a ready source of reference for them to be able to do their jobs or to consult if they needed to. And Mike and I are very excited about it.
Yeah, that's something that's certainly needed, because I think in pilot training, you don't learn that stuff. There's no class typically for that, unless maybe you go to an aviation university and there's some sort of management course. But most people that find themselves in a leadership position are just figuring it out, and to have a reference to go to for things that aren't flying related, like taxes, like you said, or figuring out compensation, like all these things that you're then thrust into and expected to be the expert on, that you have zero experience or training for, has always been a problem in this business. I mean, that's why the CAM program was probably created, and things to give something. But a lot of times you don't have time to go through the CAM certification, because a lot of times you find yourself in this position quickly or unexpectedly. And here you are, and you're like, oh, I'm the guy now. And so to have a reference or something to be like, okay, so we're going to buy a new airplane. What does that mean for like taxes? And then at least to have a reference now to go to.
Well, and the other problem too is, like, a lot of times you don't even know what you don't know. There's so much, and especially if you get that surprise promotion, maybe you're going to typewriting school, and then all of a sudden you're like just trying to figure the airplane out, but then there's 9 other things you've got to figure out too. So having that resource, I think, will be huge. So I'm definitely excited to check that out. I'm imagining the book could be about that thick if you wanted it to be. Hopefully there's an electronic version, but what's it going to look like, Dr. Broyhill?
Well, we tried to keep, to the extent we could, we tried to keep the conversations about the different topics contained enough that it gave you sufficient depth of information, but wasn't like an encyclopedia where you're having to go through page after page after page to find what you need. So mostly it's a reference book, but it also gives you hints about I need more information. Here's where I need to go. Or I need to look up more, here's a
Mm.
source. Because every chapter will have a bibliography at the back. And, if you find that you are more curious about certain topics, then you'll have the opportunity to explore those further. To your former point, Dylan, I mean, I was a chief pilot at one Fortune 100 company and was offered a position to be a director at another one. And, the whole time I'm chief pilot, I'm looking at the director's job going, I could do it as well as that guy can. Oh my gosh, what an idiot. I'm not necessarily, that disrespectful, but we all think that. We all have that arrogance. And that's gotten to the director's job and I'm going, holy cow, there's a lot I didn't know. I mean, about interacting at this level and a lot of information that people just kind of automatically expect me to have that I don't have a clue about. And our goal with the book is partially to bridge that gap. If you find yourself in that position, you're suddenly, you're the last person standing in a flight department and all of a sudden they point their finger at you and say, guess what? You're in charge now. You can grab the book and say, well, I need to know something about this, this, this. And you turn to the chapter and you find it and you go, okay, well, there's a little something. Maybe this will help. And that's really the goal, is to provide people that source of information that they can have. And I'll have the name of the book is going to be, it's called the Business Aviation Book, Leading Operational Excellence. And it'll be available this fall at base, practically sometime prior. As I mentioned, we'll get it on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. And, but I'll have a cover shot for you probably next time we talk. And that we can circulate maybe with the podcast and everything. But Mike and I are very excited about it. And Mike Nichols has been the guiding force behind this. I'm happy to be brought along for the ride, but he's been a driving force behind this, and it's going to be a fantastic work.
Awesome.
Well, you are really contributing to business aviation in spades, Dr. Broyhill. So we certainly appreciate all of the labors that you've put in. I'm glad you've retired from flying because, but you're staying in the industry because it seems like you've got a lot to give. So I know we certainly appreciate it, and many of us in business aviation are going to benefit from your extra time available. So thank you so much.
Happy to stick around, and I still do contract fly, by the way, from time to time. So hopefully,
oh well, there you go.
Yeah,
very good.
Not as often as I'd like, but yeah.
It's the way it goes. But I'll tell you what, the industry will turn again. And then I've noticed, anecdotally, we talked about some of the flight departments closing and everything else. Contract flying as another barometer of that too, I think, and you could start to see those trips. Everyone's fighting for them online, trying to get a little extra flying. And then all of us, a couple years goes, the phone rings off the hook. So it's all just kind of a pendulum that goes back and forth. And we've joked with James O'Neill, our career coach that we have on the show a lot. We need to have like the pilot leverage index, which sort of moves back and forth, sort of like the fear and greed index for investors. Yes, I kind of feel like there's one of those as well. So maybe we can collaborate to get that thing figured out. I feel like the leverage is down a little bit, but it's interesting. I'll tell you one of the big takeaways from our conversation today, you're saying business aviation compensation still rose 10% in 2024 when the airlines weren't even hiring.
Yep.
That's interesting to me.
Yep.
We do lag a little bit. I feel like we do lag, airlines will bump compensation, then business aviation kind of has to catch up. So maybe we're chasing, but it's when things pick up again at the airlines, and we know they will at some point, then there's probably more ground to gain.
Well, it's funny. I'm writing this series on LinkedIn about the top 10 reasons why aviation leaders and comp professionals want increased compensation. I remember having a conversation. I did some work for a company based in Charlotte, and I got on the phone or a Zoom call with their head of compensation. And keep in mind, they're at the CLT airport, American hub. And she's going, we don't compete with the airlines. And I'm kind of going, yeah, you do. I mean, you can say you're not competing with the airlines, but you're competing with the airlines. Whether you're competing, and I say this all the time, it's not a function of whether they steal your people directly. It's a function of whether they steal people from the operation down the street, and those people steal your people, because they've lost people to the airlines. So everybody is competing with the
That's
airlines.
a good point.
Yes, you've got three kinds of, they're like the voting groups that we're in, conservative, independent and liberal, where everybody's got their own. The people you're after are the independent minded voters. And in the business aviation, it's the same. You've got the people that are never going to go to the airlines, no matter what. I was one of those. Got out of the Air Force, whole airline thing just bored the you-know-what out of me. There was no way I was going to do it. But then you got the people on the left, that's the right side, the hardcore staying with business aviation no matter what side. Then you've got the people on the left who kind of maybe got into business aviation to build some time, kind of see what it was like, maybe do a little while, but the whole time their eye is on the airlines or they're thinking about going to the airlines. And then you've got the undecided voters in the middle. And the people we're after are the undecided voters in the middle. What do we need to do in business aviation? Keep them. Number one, we need to make sure we pay them enough so they don't look stupid when they go to sit down at the table with their spouse and their spouse says, how come you're not going to the airlines? You can make a lot more money there. Number two, we need to give them a job that they like coming to work for. Because if you go to the airlines, it's not just a job change, it's a lifestyle change, particularly if you have to commute. If you have to commute, it's like having two jobs. So we got to give them the reason they want to stay. If we do those two successfully, we'll keep our people. We'll win over all those undecided voters in the middle. If we don't, we'll lose them. And some people are out there like this lady that I talked to. We don't compete with the airlines. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, you kind of need to get a bigger picture. So
Let's take a quick timeout from our conversation to talk about our favorite product of 2025, and that is Amigo Aeroto's T1. If you listen to our recent conversation with them, you know it has changed Max's life at the airport. No longer is he struggling to push that 2,000-pound airplane in and out of the hangar. Simply hooks up the T1 now and effortlessly moves that airplane back and forth. If you want to get more information, check out the link in the show notes for Aeroto's website. They have a tow that'll accommodate up to 15,000 pounds. And they've got a special offer for our listeners. Use checkout code 21FIVE to get $100 off any product. Scroll down on your podcast app to find the link to Aerotow and check out all of the products they have for pilots. Okay, back to the show.
I think the majority too is the independent, the undecided, because that's who I was, and I was ultimately swayed one direction, but and now I'm caught in this unique situation where I do both, and
you're voting twice.
And I'm voting twice, but it's really funny because I really like things about both, and it's like I can't tell you, like, I don't know, it's a interesting thing, and like you said, at some point, I think with the compensation end of things, which inclusive of retirement, loss of license insurance, all of those things, I would wrap into that. You have to make that where people don't feel irresponsible about staying in business aviation. Like at some point you're like, it really does. The rest of it becomes so much pressure that you're like, I have no choice here. Like it would be irresponsible to my family to stay in this whatever position. Right. But then the other side of it, is I think a lot tied to quality of life, because it would be hard for me to find somebody that would say that flying in the airlines is more professionally stimulating than it is in business aviation. Like it is not. Like, I've flown from Phoenix to San Jose more times. I could almost do it blindfolded at this point. And but in business aviation, and I'm certainly there's business aviation jobs too where you go to 4 or 5 destinations all the time, constantly, which is very similar. But it's just a lot more dynamic in the whole, from soup to nuts to doing a flight, right? But I think that the other half of it always boils down to quality of life and like how you can plan your life of things you want to do outside of that job. And that's what the other big driving force, I think. So
that's the biggest shortfall.
I like your analogy though.
It's the biggest shortfall that we have in business aviation is the not being able to plan your life thing. And so there are so many people who underestimate that as a factor that it just floors me. I mean, still, even today, we have that anathema of common sense model where you have the single airplane, 2 pilots, and it's okay. We only need 2 because we don't fly that much. It's like, you just hang your head, and that's not the point. The point is, are you expecting these people to always be available? It's not a question of how much they fly. It's a question of what their availability is. And if you want them to always be available, they may not be working, but it's like they're working because they can't do anything. And I still encounter that, particularly among management companies, and it just makes that sort of, it's like, come on, wake up.
Yeah, I've told this story before, but I was sitting at a bar on a ski hill with the owner that I flew with, and he was grinding me about, we get paid a lot of money for not having to fly very much, and kind of, ribbing me, joking. And I told him, I said, listen, dude, you don't pay me to fly. He's like, well, what do I pay you to do then? I'm like, you pay me to be available to fly. It's two very different things. And I
Absolutely,
it was the total like light bulb moment. He's like, oh, that's a good point. And so, but yeah, that's the thing. It's a total. At the airlines, we get paid to fly. When I'm not flying, I'm not getting paid. Well, I mean, in a broad sense.
But you also know when you're not flying and when you are flying. Yeah, I mean, so that's the thing.
That's right. Yeah, and it's so funny because I've always said this. I'm like, I wish at the airlines you could start at the top of the seniority list and move opposite to the bottom, because when you're 64 and a half, like I fly with these guys are like, I don't want the weekends off. I want to golf on Wednesdays. I don't want to go to Costco on the weekends. Like I don't want to mix with all these people. And then you have everybody at the bottom of the seniority list that has their kids have soccer games on Saturdays, and like they have school during the week, and they have spring break. They want to have off because that's when their kids are off, and they're the ones, duking it out on the bottom of the seniority list. But it's kind of funny because with business aviation too, like if you're 64, you don't have any kids at home anymore. It's just you and your wife, and the owner wants to go skiing in Aspen every spring break. Sounds good to me. Like,
yeah,
I'm in, and fly your wife up and have a partially subsidized ski trip every year. Like, but that changes as your life situation changes. So
one of the things I've
it's
found
always
very humorous.
I don't know that. It's just, I'm just trying to point out the irony of the system as it sits and how it's just a weird deal. Cause that's ultimately like when my kids were little and I was in business aviation, like the weekend or Monday, Tuesday, when they weren't in school, it didn't really make a difference. Right. But all of a sudden, like your schedule starts to slowly change. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, this isn't really working very good anymore.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But there's still light at the end of the tunnel because they leave, and then all of a sudden the weekends aren't as big of a deal anymore again.
Right.
So it's a real thing.
I participate. I
don't know. Can you figure out how to solve that, Dr. Broyhill?
Yeah.
When's your next book on how to figure that whole situation out?
To your point, I fly an S211 jet trainer. There's a outfit here in DFW that I will not his name I won't mention in this. But we do have set recovery training and some other things. But it's with two S211 Marchetti jets, and it's a heck of a lot of fun to fly. But most of the people I fly alongside of are airline pilots. And so in the WhatsApp thread, some guy just recently made captain at the domicile that he wanted. And I think he was an American guy, and I think it was Dallas. I might be getting this wrong. But all the comments start coming about all the things they can do to work as little as possible and still make as much money as they can. And I'm watching this conversation develop, and it's just kind of like, wait, what? I mean, it's one of those things that your mind doesn't really work that way, but I guess when you're in an environment like that, after a while, it does. And it was just kind of an interesting. I didn't participate because I didn't have any expertise to offer, but it was just interesting to watch that discussion materialize.
Completely different mindset.
Yeah, well, it's
playing
a very complex game. Yeah. is essentially what it comes. You have the rules of the game in the form of the contract.
Yeah. That is what I gleaned from it.
Yeah, it is. You have the rules of the game. It's the contract. You have the platform, which is the scheduling. How you interact with the schedule via the computer, and then you have the players, which are the rest of the pilots. And it's literally. A lot of times your quality of life can be directly affected by how well you play the game, in that how well you know the rules, how quick you are to make changes, how well you train your wife on how to play the game sometimes. Also, it's a thing for sure.
So Max, since you operate in both worlds, I have a question. I have a question for you. So I oftentimes when I'm flying on the airlines going from event to event, and I'm an executive platinum on American, so I spend most of my time on there because I'm a DFW guy. So, and something stupid happens, whether it's a scheduling snafu or whatever, and they sit there and my flight's delayed and I'm not hearing anything. All I sit there, I have a term, I embrace the suck, because the airlines suck, and that's the reason why business aviation exists, because the people that we fly around won't put up with this nonsense. They want to get where they need to get. And remember, we have property in Florida. That's where I am now with the barn door in the background. That we're turning into Airbnb for people who have come to Ocala to compete with horses. But they were trapped in Tampa, and America just kept messing with them. And finally, they canceled the flight. And she's an aviation transactions attorney that helps people buy and sell business jets. And I said, hey, this is why you and I have jobs, because we're going to embrace the suck sometimes. So, but Max,
Right.
you operate in both worlds. So when you're in both worlds, how do you think about one versus the other? That's my question to you. So what does that feel like sometimes?
Well, I have a saying that says, do not worry about the things you cannot control. So in business aviation, you're in control of a lot, right? Like you're making the operational decisions, where in the airlines, you're just a chess piece in this other huge game that you're not really part of. You're just a pawn. And so sometimes things will happen that appear on the surface to make zero sense. You're like, why would you do, like, what are we doing right now? But there's two things you have to remember. One, you don't have all the data, because the airline schedule is such a complex thing. You have, each airplane is flying, 8 or whatever legs a day with 2 pilots and, 3 or 4 flight attendants in our case, that are needed. So you have all, and they're moving around. Like, we move, the flight attendants leave, new ones come. It's this huge, very complex system that you can't possibly keep up with. And so a lot of times when this crazy stuff is happening, there are people that get really worked up about it, whether it's your flight that you're flying or not, or you're a passenger or whatever. But, what I do and I suggest is, like, you just got to let it go, dude. Like, what are you going to do? What is getting upset going to do? Literally, it changes nothing except for it negatively impacts you. So, like, that's why it's always good to have a book downloaded on your iPad, perhaps some Netflix shows saved, things that can distract you when you just need to waste some time. Because big part of this job, of both jobs, is wasting time, or because, like, at home I have no time. Like, I'm very busy, and the most relaxing thing I do is go on a trip at work, because then
An airline trip.
or a business aviation trip too, because a lot of times that's a lot of downtime. We're doing whatever we feel we want, and so you have to be good at just getting through the day. Now, especially if it's in the middle of a trip, like, I really just like, and now with the new work rules and stuff that basically all the airlines got in the latest round of contract negotiations, like, most of the time you're getting paid more too. Like, we swapped airplanes in Nashville. I think I may have told this. And we show up to our new airplane. It's like delayed like 3.5 hours. And the captain's like, oh, unbelievable. This is the day 2 of a 3-day, right? We're going to St. Louis. And so he's like, oh, I can't believe this is unbelievable. If we could have just kept that airplane, we would have been on time, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, let's just go to the new crew lounge in Nashville. Let's check it out, right? We got nothing else to do now. So we go down there, and he's like, so I'm like, this will be funny. So I get out the iPad, and I have the contract. And I'm like, get out your phone real quick. I'm like, let's just do a little math. And I go, okay, so now our ground time is increased, from when we blocked in to when we're going to depart, it's going to be 4 hours. Since that's over 2.5 hours, we get like ground time override at 0.001 per minute. So do 60 times 4.5 times 0.001. Okay, so that's an extra whatever it is, right? I'm just pulling numbers out. 2.5 trips, right? Okay, and now our duty day is gonna be this, so we get an extra trip for that. So that's 3.5 trips. And I just kind of calculate out. I'm like, so now your pay rate, you're a 12-year captain, so you're at $363. So 363 times 4.5. What does that come out to? And he comes out. I'm like, that's how much we're getting paid extra for this delay. How do you feel now? He goes, oh, I feel a lot better about that now. I'm like, hey, you want to watch a movie real quick and get paid, $2,000 is to watch this movie? He goes, oh, that sounds like a pretty good idea now. And so it's just about it's all about perspective, man. And it's like, you can sit there and stew in the suck, or you can embrace it and be like, oh, cool, I can finish this book or listen to this podcast or do something productive. That's what I try and do. Because it really, if I just do nothing, like, I can't do that. That makes me feel crappy. Like, I've tried to do that. My first corporate flying job I got was a pretty low time. And I remember I sat by the pool for about a month, and I'm like, okay, this is enough. And I went to real estate school and got a real estate license, and figured out other productive things to do. And it's the same even on an airline trip. If there's downtime, like I recently enrolled in YouTube University, learning how to draw in AutoCAD by watching a YouTube video on an iPad next to my laptop and learning. So that's like my project right now, is I'm learning how to draw in AutoCAD, which is
cool.
Quite complex, it turns out. but just find something to do, dude, that is productive. Learn something, read a book, listen to a podcast. I don't know, find something to do, and realize what you have control of and what you don't, and worry about the former, not the latter.
That's how I started writing books. And I've written like 6 novels, and the reason I started writing novels is I was going to Saudi Arabia 30 days on, 30 days off. And when we weren't flying, sitting in hotel rooms, you don't go out in Saudi Arabia. You don't go out and do tourist stuff in Saudi Arabia. So I started writing. I had been writing all my whole adult life, but I started writing books. And that's, to your point, occupying your time constructively and using it to do something better is not a bad way to look at it.
Absolutely.
Pluses and minuses on both sides of the fence. I love your analogy about the undecided voters, swing votes.
That is great. It's the swing voters.
That's a really good way to look at it. Dr. Broyhill, we always appreciate you having on the show and providing your insight into the marketplace. We're super excited about the book you're writing. So next time we check in, we're hoping to learn more about that and gain some more knowledge from you. So thanks so much for taking the time to join us. We'll have all the information for the AirComp Calculator in the show notes, so folks can click on that and check out the different offerings. And just what is the name of that new product for the individuals? Can you tell folks how to find that if they haven't seen that offering?
So basically, there's 2 ways they can buy one report. So there's 3 different offerings. One is the navigator level. If you're entertaining a job offer and you don't want to necessarily make a comparison, you can just get compensation ranges for the different positions at a much reduced price. But if you want to make a comparison, you can get on the standard side of the calculator and buy one report. If that comparison, the job offer does not include long-term incentives, that's just the standard calculator. If it does include long-term incentives, that's the plus side of the calculator. So there's essentially 3. And at any time, if you get on the web page and you say, I don't know what to do, there's an email address. You can send me an email. You can call into our number and we'll help you figure it out.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll have links for all that in the show notes. Thanks so much, Dr. Broyhill. Until next time.
Thanks very much.
Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
The statements made in this show are our own opinions and do not reflect, nor were they under any direction from any of our employers.